Hello, everybody. This is Joe Cabrera, and I'm recording my UNSC Security Council project. And here's my audience. This is my boss, Mary. Let me see if I can get it there. Are you in it?
Hello.
Hello. And there's her husband, Rich.
Greetings.
Everybody's accounted for. Sorry if they're not included. There's her grandchildren. So, all right. Set up here. So basically, I will spare you all of the finer points that all of the fellow students are aware of, but basically, there's a hypothetical situation where North Korea and US are in talks of denuclearization, and those talks have fallen through in dramatic fashion. So North Korea is really on the defensive, and they are saying that US is being duplicitous in all of their talks and not making good on their promises of the treaty. So they are going to continue amassing arms, going to continue running all their facilities and manufacturing nuclear weapons. So the entire international climate is in a heightened tension, a heightened state. And with that being said, recently, 3 Japanese patrol vessels were sailing through what is technically North Korea's maritime boundary. They were in what is called the exclusive economic zone. And it's not uncommon for Japanese vessels to be sailing through this area. It's not uncommon for even South Korea, which is North Korea's archenemy, so to speak, to be sharing it. It's a commercial waterway, there's fisheries, but because of this heightened tension, North Korea launched a land-based missile and they shot down the fleet of Japanese ships, which were non-military, and they killed 56 fishermen. And after that, they issued a warning. They've been vowing to totally take up arms against anything that could be perceived as American interests. And obviously what they did violated international law, but they claimed preemptive self-defense because it is Kim Jong-un's belief that those could have been spying vessels. And after that, Japan is now brought into an altercation. Japan has no actual offensive military. They rely on the US through a treaty of mutual cooperation and security, and through that, it basically associates the US. So the US brings over a naval fleet to assist Japan, not in any offensive way, but for protective purposes. And then a random unmarked vessel with chemical weapons on board fires off a biochemical attack aimed at the American ships, and it misses. But there was actually quite a few unmarked vessels. It misses, but it was aimed for American ships, and a few of them get shot down, and then one of them gets captured by a jointly managed Australian and US vessel. And with that one, they basically apprehend all of the commanding crew. It's all North Koreans, but they are not in uniforms. They do not claim to be part of any North Korean governmental operation. They claim to be acting alone. And obviously there's suspicions there. So after that, with the continued tensions, now Tokyo and Seoul are all in a state of panic. There are people fleeing because they're worried about a nuclear attack. There is people fleeing by plane, train, automobile. There's people fleeing by foot. So there's even internally displaced populations, people running low on supplies. So it's a pretty grim situation. So that is where we begin. And then this is the UN Security Council meeting, and I represent Indonesia. Indonesia sounds like it may not have any part in this. It actually has a huge part in this because the North Korean citizen militia was apprehended by Australia. And then Indonesia is very close with Australia. They share a maritime border, and they also are the only country that has diplomatic ties with every country involved. Everyone on the UN Security Council, China, the US, we're trading partners with South Korea. We are very close with North Korea, despite a lot of objections from the international community. There is an embassy in Jakarta, just as there is one in Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea. And the citizen militia wants to go to their embassy inside of Jakarta and speak with their consular officials. So Indonesia has quite the pivotal advantage, which it wants to do right by the international community by making the most out of it. It is an archipelagic country. It's about 3,500 miles long. There's about 7,000 islands, and it separates the Asian continent from the Australian continent. It spans the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. So it has a key geographical placement that it wants to really steward and be a arbitrator between all these countries, be a mediator in communications to North Korea, and then it also wants to help in any legal or commercial disputes in maritime law. So back to North Korea's violation, when they launched the attack, it violates Article 2 of the UN Charter, which says you cannot use of force unless it is entirely justified in the moment, which cites another article of the UN Charter, or it was sanctioned by the UN Security Council. Now, they acted hastily, and they shot down what was indeed not a military effort. So that could very likely land them in a punitive situation for violation of Article 2. What Indonesia recommends is that they do have to go appear before the UNSC, and then we will give it a fair trial and we will assess it, because this was a time of heightened tension. And for the benefit of the doubt, Japan had not, as we know, given any radio signals about their presence. So it was perhaps an excessive use of force, but we should take a look at it. And in the meantime, throughout those proceedings, North Korea's main issue is that they are worried about an American-aimed attack. They are claiming preemptive self-defense. They're very worried about their safety, or so they claim. So we all sign an armistice. Every involved actor must sign an armistice, an immediate treaty that claims nonviolence from here on out while we get this all sorted out. And that will be under the auspice that North Korea does have to go before the Security Council and answer for this situation with the Japanese flotilla of fisher vessels. And if they are found guilty for acting without formal authorization, there will be condemnation from the Security Council. There will be, possibly sanctions, but we have to honor the treaty that says no more military action. And then as far as the citizen militia, they are considered unlawful combatants in this situation. They did initiate warfare, but they are still granted certain rights. So Indonesia wants to take it upon themselves. They are asking to go to their North Korean embassy. Right now they're in Australian custody. We ask that they be surrendered to Indonesian custody, but they will not go to their embassy because that would violate a certain charter that says it's not likely that that government will see fit their penalty. It is likely that they'll be let off the hook if they are given over to Jong-un. And unfortunately, that would most certainly ruffle some feathers with the rest of the international community, especially after they almost instigated an entire outbreak of warfare, almost killed several Americans, and they violated environmental law because they used a biochemical nerve agent that was damaging to the sea. They violated the UN Convention Law of the Sea, the UN Charter, and they used an act of aggression, which could be considered enough to actually appear before the International Criminal Court, which is actually a judiciary body. So a lot of these treaties are customary law. So, like I said, for the violation of the Japanese attack, you go before the Security Council, you might have sanctions, you might be reprimanded, you might, it'll definitely affect your treatment, but it's not actually judiciary. The International Criminal Court, you are incarcerated, you go to jail. There's actual, I guess you could say, actual permanent penalties there. And they are not claimed by Jong-un. He says he had nothing to do with them, but they are in Australian custody, so we would like to take them, and they will be fully allowed to speak with their consular officials, but the consular officials will probably have to bring home some unfortunate news because we are not likely to surrender them to the North Korean custody. They will have to answer before the International Criminal Court, and if they aren't deemed an act of aggression, or if certain UN conventions don't hold up to their actions and are not held accountable to them, which is possible because a lot of these charters were drafted by the UN, and North Korea is a bit of the most roguish state there is, so they didn't sign a lot of treaties. So if you didn't sign them, you're not held accountable to their articles. But they have signed a few, and they are part of the UN, and these are actually unlawful combatants, so they're kind of men without a country at this point. If they are not, then we will hold them accountable for the Indonesian rule of law. And while that is all happening, we want the armistice to keep peace, and then we want things to be proactive, and as far as keeping every actor accountable for their act of aggression or violence, we want to quell that immediately. And since the U.S. is kind of implicated in the Japanese destruction, we also want to call on the American military bases. Since Japan doesn't have an official offensive military force, then we want to use their American troops that are hosted in Okinawa and in Seoul, bring them in, and then they can be used not for offensive military action, because that could definitely escalate the nuclear tension, but rather to have them supply resources to the internally displaced and just have an overall military presence, which might ease tensions and de-escalate all the hostilities. And then eventually it is the hope that they will bring people back into their country. And Indonesia has a huge role in this because we are very close with Australia. We're trading partners with America. Japan is a very close ally. And ultimately, we're kind of the last lifeline to North Korea. And because of our geographical placement, we kind of have a little bit of an actual flagship in all of these areas. And so that is our idea, that we honor a lot of North Korea's wishes, but we also immediately call for peace during this time. And while we do that, we definitely take anyone who possibly could be looking at incriminating consequences and hold them up to account before all of the international courts. So that's basically the gist of my Security Council project, and thank you for listening.